What if it was destined? Wasn't it always you and me? What if it was destined?
Welcome to Season 8 of the Life Giver Podcast. I'm your host, Corey Weathers. I'm a military spouse, clinician, and leadership coach, and Life Giver is where I get to spark honest conversations, interview experts, and encourage you with topics on military culture, marriage, and leadership. So give yourself permission to pause and lean in. There's something for everyone here.
What if it was destined? Wasn't it always you and me?
Welcome to the Life Giver Podcast. This is Corey Weathers. In the last episode, I talked about the importance of incorporating hard things in your life, trying something new, maybe getting back to a hobby that you let go of a long time ago. Whatever it is, but really it's the idea of trying something that's difficult, bringing some joy into your life that takes time, that takes effort, and also forces you to practice setting aside the time in your life to actually do something to help you grow. And so much of our lives end up becoming filled with parenting and jobs and striving and whatever it is that we forget to have fun, we forget to invest in ourselves. And some of you out there don't even know where you would start. And if that's you, then it's a really good topic for you to start thinking about. But sometimes hard things are brought into our life that are not of our choosing. And it is a season of suffering or a season of difficulty. And it may be a never-ending season. There are so many people that are struggling with a medical diagnosis or are an EFMP family where you have a child. Some of you maybe even have a child that you will be taking care of for the rest of your life. And so there will be hard things that come into our life that are not necessarily at first glance something that brings you joy. And yet, when we walk through it, and going back to Angela Duckworth's definition, when we walk through it and choose to lean into it and grow from it and allow it to stretch us, there is joy that can come from it. So today's interview is with the Hardings. And I'm going to ask you to listen to this interview regardless of if you have a child with a medical condition. Maybe the circumstances of this couple don't exactly fit your circumstances. And yet we can learn so much from someone else's story. And you never know when you're going to come across someone else that has a similar experience. And because of listening to this interview, your compassion has grown and your ability to listen and lean into someone else's story. But I just know that you're going to hear encouragement. You're going to hear ways that you can also grow and be inspired by listening to their story. I knew it was important to get it out there. I know the Army's quality of life is expanding to EFMP issues here in the fall. And so if you do have a family member that is struggling with a medical diagnosis, or if you have a neurodiverse child, this is an incredible interview worth listening to for sure. And then I have a bonus interview coming out in the next couple days with my friend Amber Mattingly that I think will also kind of help us expand this conversation even more. So be on the lookout for that. But for now, here's my interview with the Hardings. I'm thrilled to share an interview today with Monica and Aaron Harding. Aaron and Monica have an enriching story about going through some very difficult things, especially as it relates to their son. And I know that so many of you listening have gone through not only the stressors of being a military couple, but also trying to endure this lifestyle while also navigating medical issues. So those of you who are listening that maybe don't have some of those struggles of medical issues, I hope that you will still listen in to this story, because I think that all of us, nothing is promised in life when it comes to a smooth ride or easygoing. We're not promised perfection. And so I really think this has more to do with how do we take care of ourselves? How do we take care of our family as we endure suffering, as we endure hardship? And all of us will go through that at some point. And so I hope you will listen in, because I think there's going to be a lot that we can pull from Monica and Aaron as they share just their particular story and how they've endured it to this point. So Erin and Monica, I'm just going to come to you guys. Thank you guys for being willing to come on the podcast and share your story with other people. So welcome.
Thank you, Corey. We're happy to be here, and thank you for the opportunity to share our story.
Yeah. So Erin, why don't you start? I should have gone to Monica, but I'm going to give Monica plenty of opportunities here. From spouse to spouse, we know that we can answer these questions as well. But I think just to start, Erin, do you want to share a little bit of your background in the service? Share what branch you're part of, how long you've been in, what you did. I think you had a really unique MOS as well. And so maybe just share a little bit of that and where you guys are today. Monica, you can definitely fill in and just kind of share what it's been like for you guys in the last few years.
Yeah, so I started off my military career back in the early mid 80s as a Navy corpsman. I knew I wanted to go into medicine. So I served 4 years, did a deployment, and then knew that I wanted to go get my education. So I got out, returned home, Phoenix, Arizona, where I grew up, and got my education from Arizona State. And in that time, I stayed in the reserves, and then returned to Navy service as a laboratory officer, serving with the Medical Service Corps, and eventually getting my master's in transfusion medicine, blood banking, where I served with the Armed Services Blood Program, deployed a couple of times out of Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, and was responsible at the CENTCOM headquarters level, managing the blood assets for Central Command across Afghanistan and Iraq. And then I retired at the end of 2012 after 28 years of active duty and reserve service.
I was about to say, did I hear you say you were active duty, then reserve, and then you came back in active duty?
Yes, that because we had just gotten married in 1996. In May of 1996. So in June is when I went. June, July is when I went. And so that was sort of her real first, feel of the military presence. And then when I returned, I found out I got my commission. And then we ended up, going to training, and then ended up in Yokosuka, Japan. So she quickly, after being married, ended up, moving away from home and her mom and all of that she's ever known growing up in Arizona. And so that really was, I think, partly foundational for us because it really it required us to really rely on one another. Fortunately, I'd been in Yokosuka, Japan on my previous deployment. And so I was very familiar with the culture and the community, which was fantastic. And I loved being in Yokosuka, Japan, in that area, the community, the people. And so, again, that really relied on us. And so the first year of our marriage, we were probably separated, more than half of our first year. But that gave us the opportunity to really connect and work on our relationship.
Well, and I think some people are listening right now and they're going, what is retirement like? How are you guys feeling after 28 years of service and now that you're into retirement?
I have to say that it was I had anxiety thinking about it, only because the military was all I knew. And I had, we had moved to how many different duty stations, 5 or 6, 7. I don't even know anymore. But we just, I thought, what's this going to be like? And how are we going to take care of Jackson? Because, we have 3 children. Our first daughter is almost 25. And then, our middle daughter is, just turned 22. And then we have Jackson. And Jackson was our main concern. The girls they had moved several times, so had Jackson, but it was, what's going to happen with Jackson and where is he? We knew that he was going to require, 24-hour care, based on just how he was growing up with, his struggles. And, we knew that we had to find a location, a state that was going to best fit his needs. And, after the various states we had lived in, we knew San Diego was going to be the best for him as far as growing into adulthood. And that's when we relocated to San Diego from the Virginia area.
Yeah. I mean, I think when service members are going to retire, I think for me, my observation would be that, you can relocate to where you have family, friends, community, or a job, right? And, that can mean at first you can start off like you have 50 states or if you overseas, if you're looking at federal or whatever. I mean, so I think, families really trying to figure out where they want to go, what's important in that family's life. We could have easily stayed in the Washington, D.C., Northern Virginia area, right? I mean, there's a ton of opportunities that would have been there, but that really wasn't our community. So community was more important for us. Being from Phoenix, San Diego, we had really built a lot of our community, having been stationed here a number of times. So we really found ourselves in San Diego being home, and we were able to find a job and kind of live out, as Monica said, services within California, and knowing them was really important.
Well, and how long have you been retired?
I've been retired 10 years now. Yeah,
10 years.
It's crazy to think about.
So, and I think you bring up a really good point. Like you're saying, so many people often have the opportunity to decide where they're going to retire based off of family or, whatever state they want to go to. And here you clearly had this other variable of making sure that you had adequate medical care and what would be a good place for Jackson to go. So why don't we talk a little bit more about Jackson, about the story that you guys have and how that unfolded. So you have 4 children. Jackson is your third. Is that correct?
We have 3 children.
You have three children. Sorry. You have 3 children. Jackson is your third, and he is currently 17. Is that right?
Correct.
So why don't you share a little bit, because he has a very rare disorder. So, and I was reading through some of the symptoms that he has, and I would not want anybody to be frightened by some of the symptoms that can be so common, is what I thought of. Like we just hear a lot of these symptoms frequently, but this was a very rare disorder for him. So share with everyone a little bit about where the symptoms first started coming up and Jackson getting the diagnosis, and just kind of walk us through what that was like for you guys.
Yeah. So Jackson being our third, having had 2 healthy children, our daughters. And so when Jackson was born, he was born with the umbilical cord wrapped around his neck 3 times. And so I was in the delivery room, and I remember vividly the midwife and I just, reacting very quickly to she was observing, what we were both observing. Jackson was, she reacted very quickly, called in additional team members. When Jackson finally was able, was birthed, they took Jackson, and I recall that he didn't kink up as quickly as, the girls had previously. And so I could see them, stimulating him on his chest and, oxygen below by. And it seemed like forever, but eventually, he did start breathing. But I think that in the back of our mind, as, fast forward 9 months later, when we started observing developmental delays, we kind of wondered, what maybe the impact was. Because his APGAR scores, those scores that they assess the baby for, basic life function, right? We're all within normal limits. And so, but it made us really wonder what happened. And so then 9 months, we started developmental delay. So we immediately, we go into, therapy, physical therapy here to help him walk, and he ends up in orthotics. But around this time, so that was in 2000, he was born in 2005. And then he wasn't walking. He didn't walk till almost 2. And that was a time where I was getting prepared to deploy for my first time in 2007. And I was going to be gone almost a year. And so here I was leaving Monica, And then we relocated, returned from deployment, relocated to San Diego, and a year later I deployed again for another year. And right before that time period is when seizures started. So we started seeing drop seizures, absent seizures, and again, this is all happening on top of autism diagnosis, and we enter again. I'm getting ready to deploy. I recall back looking at some of his medical records where, there's the possibilities of having a genetic disorder. And eventually in 2010, we ended up with getting genetic testing, and we ended up with a diagnosis of a de novo random gene called SynGAP1. And so he was diagnosed with SynGAP1 intellectual disability. Yeah, we did observe, strange, like he didn't cry a whole lot, but we didn't think much of it. We were driving, cross country at one time. But again, it wasn't until that 9-month baby well check where we realized he wasn't meeting his milestones. And we were lucky being in the medical field, lucky to have relationships with the clinicians. And they were very, I would say, proactive in having him evaluated for developmental delays.
Well, and Jackson is 17 now. And so he's had this diagnosis for a while. And so, Monica, share what it's been like for you guys over the last, especially 10 years, right? These last 10 years of knowing about this diagnosis. When I was reading over the symptoms, the seizures, sound significant. What was the hardest part for you guys? I mean, I would think as a parent, like I remember my son is EFMP, not anywhere close to what you guys are going through, but I know for most parents, when you are going through this process of trying to figure out like, what is going on with my child? And I know combined with a lot of moving and every doctor having a different perspective on what might be going on, I know it was an incredibly stressful season for us just trying to figure out and nail down what was actually going on and getting a diagnosis and then trying to get some kind of treatment. And so I hear your story and I have my own like adrenal, reaction, of what it was like for us to go through that. So what was it like for you guys going through when he's having these symptoms, trying to figure out what is the actual diagnosis and then dealing with the lifestyle and the stress of the lifestyle on top of having now a special needs child?
So honestly, when Jackson got diagnosed with SynGAP1, it was a sense of relief for myself. He was an older child at sounds weird, but 10. But I had gone through so many years with him of nonstop therapy, nonstop dietary changes, supplements, medications, whatever you want to call it, since he was, before he was a year old. So for myself, it was a relief that we finally figured out what was happening. And we were able to put our finger on an actual diagnosis. It didn't take me back. I wasn't scared. I wasn't shocked. I was relieved. Mm-hmm. And also there was a peace. I was at peace knowing that I had done everything I could as a mom, as a single parent for many of the times. I had done everything I could do at this point, knowing that I had done all the therapies, all the different medications, appointments. I could finally be at peace knowing, okay, we can put our finger on it. There's nothing I could have done differently. Mm-hmm. Because I struggled with that, knowing that I was by myself for a lot of it. And I had to be strong for the entire family. I also had to be especially strong for Jackson, knowing that I was doing everything for him. And yes, Dad was around, but Dad was serving our country, and Dad needed to be at peace with leaving the house and knowing that things were going to be taken care of at home. So I was finally at peace knowing, though, that I'd done everything I could and nothing would have changed had I added a different supplement or a different pill.
But that was part of the relief.
it was
Yeah.
it was a relief for myself. And then once we started connecting, I can remember it's like, okay, so what do we do now, Erin? What do we do with this diagnosis, and where do we go from here? And knowing that it was so rare, and Jackson was like the 76th patient at the time, and I thought, heck, where do we go from here? And knowing that we had done everything we could have, and knowing that we were in a good spot, San Diego, with our regional center, and the fact that Navy medicine could continue to follow him was such a relief, because we were always going back and forth from East Coast, West Coast, East Coast, West Coast. And there was never, the continuity of care was amazing. The doctors and the therapists, I had obviously mastered going back and forth. But we were able to return to the same doctors. But we were able to finally say, this is what it is. It's SynGAP 1. And now where do we go from here? Not that they had any answers.
Yeah.
But
yeah, Monica's always been, again, as parents, you have to be the best advocate for your child. And that's even probably intensified, 100-fold when you have a child with special needs. And I mean, the military does provide the community infrastructure for supporting families. I think we've found that, through the EFMP program, which all of the services are different, on how they execute the EFMP program, how a service member, where they're stationed, and the limitations the limitations that potentially could, or impact that could have on the family, right? So the family member may have to get stationed in a major location, but that also might mean that the service member for career progression may have to do unaccompanied, deployment. So there is a whole different environment that service member families have to the challenges that they have to deal with when it comes to providing for that child. Again, our children were younger, the girls were younger, right? And here, Monica was caring for a special needs child with, 2 young daughters. But she's always been the best advocate. And that's true within the healthcare part of it, but also, at 3, when he started entering the educational setting, that's another huge area where parents, you begin to learn about the complexities of life, or the administrative, political aspects of life, when you have a special need child. But you're your best child's advocate in all of the arenas of life to help them have the best possibilities.
Well, and I do want to ask you some more questions about being an advocate, because I think that there is always a little bit of angst and a lot of confusion, especially for those listening who are just now kind of starting in a place of trying to figure out how to be an advocate for their child or for their family. But before I get to that, Monica, I'd love to just kind of lean in towards you for just a second here. And first of all, what a gift for you to be able to be home and available and to do everything that you could do, to be able to look back and say that you did everything that you could do. Like, that's such a gift that I don't think everybody gets to be able to say that, or gets the opportunity to do as much as you felt like you're able to do. So first of all, what a gift that was. But I think military spouses often, I think we give ourselves there's no other choice but to be that rock, right? Like, you just know you have to dig deep and find it somewhere and figure out how to be that rock for everyone. And I really want to just give you a second to share in a little bit more of a vulnerable way. Yes, you were successfully that person, but I would love for you to encourage someone out there who is also doing a great job of that, but the cost that comes from that as well. Like, surely there was moments where you were burned out. Surely there were moments where it was really difficult. I don't think any of us navigate any of these obstacles and not be unscathed from it. And while we can come out of it and go, I just had to do it, right? Like I know that cost something from you and was difficult. So do you mind me leaning in just a little bit and letting you share the struggle of that?
Sure. Jackson having special needs was all I knew. We knew early on that there was something going on. And with Aaron coming and going, I did carry the load. I also had to rely on, I had to let my guard down, and lean on the people around me. And that was hard to do. And I later learned how to do that more often than not. But I was surrounded by Marine wives, and that in itself was very difficult because I saw how they carried themselves, and I knew I had to be almost as strong as them, if not stronger, with my husband being in the medical field. But I tried to carry a lot of the weight, and it was tough, and it ate me up inside to the point where, I'm not going to lie, but I seriously had some depression going with my husband being gone and not knowing how he was going to do. Meanwhile, I've got 3 children, very young, and Jackson. My goal was to get him caught up by the time Aaron came home. Mm-hmm. That's my mission. He's going to be walking, talking, mm-hmm. Everything's going to be back to normal. But as things were unraveling, I leaned heavily into those groups, as strong as those women were, and became emotional with them. Mm-hmm. And I have to say that I had to carrying the load for so long taught me to be very thick-skinned, and carry enormous amount of weight. But I didn't need to be that way. Now that I have figured this out, now that Jackson's almost going to be 18, almost an adult. But I have to say that I wish I would have learned that earlier. Mm-hmm. But through I have to say through some therapy, talk therapy, and letting my guard down and be more vulnerable with people, that has really allowed people to see really our struggles day in and day out. I was really great at putting on this strong front that I do have everything under control. And I really thought I did, but I didn't realize emotionally how traumatizing that was for myself, and how unhealthy it was. And I have to say that fast forward, I didn't realize how it really put a false perception for our daughters. They didn't realize how hard it was, and how we just kept it together. And that's
I think that the emotional, what I observed in the emotional impact, and I'll be honest, it's easy. It can be easy not to see it if you're not really good at sharing it. And I can. There's times where I didn't see it. I would hear about it, but we often don't share it. And I think it's really important for families, whether you have a special needs child or not, because there's stressors in life all of the time with deployments and moving and disruptions that are happening, that as a active duty, as the spouse who comes and goes, that we can do better to have those conversations with our spouse, and our spouse sharing more deeply about that. Jackson had a lot of aggression when he was very young, where medications would intensify some of that aggression, to where Monica had a lot of scratch marks and bite marks. And that's a challenge within our community, as it is with a lot of developmental disorders. But I've learned, how amazing Monica is in actually the journey of what she's been through in all of those 17 years. It wasn't until about 2 years ago that we finally realized that we needed therapy as a family. Our daughters needed it. Monica needed it. I needed it. And I think that vulnerability of seeking help is so important for families. Again, based on the different stressors that are actually happening.
I'm so glad that you guys reached that point, because what you went through was traumatic. Even if it was kind of broken apart in pieces over time, it really was a traumatic experience to go from, when we have, and, I think there's like big trauma, there's little trauma, and I think that we forget sometimes that every time something doesn't go our way, and I don't mean like Starbucks ran out of our coffee of choice. Like, I'm not talking about, I'm talking about like wanting Jackson to reach that milestone and then realizing that he's not, and then realizing we have to adjust our perspective. Every time we go through one of those moments, it's another grieving process, right? And so it's like it's a little trauma. And so those kind of add up over time. And then you don't realize just how traumatizing and stressful it has been over time to have to grieve as much, or having to muster up that level of grit to face whatever you need to face every day, to face fears, or to have courage to advocate, or whatever it is that you have to do. And that takes so much energy. When I was saying earlier that I could feel the adrenaline firing off in my body, like there are these adrenaline spikes that you go through where you're constantly like on alert all the time. And that can take a toll on your body too. So when you talk about like a decade or more of going through all of this, your family has definitely been through so much. And I also want to point out that, Monica, when you're talking about leaning into the community around you, a couple things came to mind. First of all, on one hand, it's kind of like a pro and a con. Like on one hand, our community has, especially the spouse community of all branches, especially during the 90s and 2000s, before social media basically came on the scene, there was unfortunately a lot of a culture of guardedness, and just like vulnerability was difficult at times because we all were kind of mustering up whatever we needed to from a sense of grit, right? And it was like, we all have to endure this. We all need to figure out how to not be needing everybody for everything. Like, how do we be independent and take care of what's happening in our homes? And then when you really do need that help, who do you reach out to? And so on one hand, there was kind of these messages, these subtle messages that were passed, I think, around in our community, and still a little bit today, about like, you just figured out, and you just kind of like what you first said, like, you know what, he's serving his country. And so we just need to, take care of the home front, But the other thing I love about our community is that, man, when you really need help and you really have to like bring your guard down and be vulnerable and say, I need support. Like, I need someone, whether it's I need someone to just run to the store and get me something from the grocery store, or I really just need an hour, like, or can I just have somebody to listen to me? What I love about this community is they've always shown up. Like when you really ask, they show up, because we know it's hard. Deep down inside, we know this is really hard. Whatever is happening in everybody's homes is hard. And so on some level, we're going to need help at some point. And I wanted to stress that, because I think that there is a lot of shifts happening within our culture today where it feels like the community is broken down a little bit and they're less connected than they've ever been. And yet your story is timeless, and that what I hear, the real message behind what you just said, is that we need community. We can't do it by ourselves. Vulnerability is not only important in marriage, not only important in parenting, but we've got to come outside of our homes and at least talk about what's going on, ask for help when you need it. And that people are always, I really think people are doing the best that they can. And if they know that somebody needs something, most times they're going to help if they can. And so we actually get better when we ask for help and break down just a little bit and lean on community. None of us were meant to do this by ourselves. And I see you guys shaking your head in agreement. If it's okay, I would love to ask you about this advocacy piece, because there are so many people going through their level of raising kids right now, maybe it's for their own health, but even more for their kids who are trying to figure out, how do I advocate for my family and for my kids? And I remember having this feeling of trying to figure out, like, how hard do I push versus how hard do I just like, or how much do I lean back and just trust what someone else is saying? You talked about the education system. There's like, so like, I feel like as a parent in this situation, half the time you're like storming the castle, because you're out of desperate need for answers and help and support. And then half the time you're like trying to trust what everybody has going in the system in place. So what would you encourage someone else listening? I see Monica shaking her head. What would you guys encourage someone else right now as they're trying to navigate, like, how do I know which one to do? Do I trust or do I storm? Which one?
I think that, interestingly enough, Erin and I our personalities are very different. And I'm the one that's storming the schools, the teachers, and challenging. And I've learned that that's not always great. Not that I have burned any bridges or anything. And this is where,
how can I ask, how did you realize that was not the best strategy?
Just early on, that I knew that I couldn't I had to be very careful, especially with the school system. They were not my friend. They were there to educate Jackson, and we really had to learn the laws about special education. And thankfully, we have FAPE that's across the United States. So it's not particular to only California, but learning the law and what our children are not entitled to, or not what we believe would be the best education, but what is fair and appropriate, and what we see, how we view it, and how the school views it is very different. And Jackson is on the extreme side. So yes, that did help us get the proper education, but we had to fight early on because Jackson wasn't displaying. He was, when he entered the system, he was 3 years old. And yes, he had some aggression at that age, but it's obviously progressed as he's gotten older, and so have his needs. But we had to learn to really, really be careful how we advocated in the right way. And that's where I had Erin really telling me, and this is most recently, I had to be careful and not really piss people off in my emails, and I had to be much more. I had to be less direct, and this is where Erin and I were able to balance, and where our relationship really came together, advocating for Jackson. It was both of us. We've always had a very open relationship, and I just knew that. Erin is the person that's used to going into wartime, and he's got that calmness, that sense that I don't want to say where he lacks the emotion, but we just come at it very differently, right? Whereas the mom, I don't want to say we're the lion or the bear or whatever you want to call it, but these are our children, these are our babies, and we're going to advocate to the moon as much as we need to, and back and forth. But no, therapy didn't help us. We just had to, kind of learn the hard way. He needed to kind of push a little bit more, and I had to push less. And that's really how we made success with Jackson's educational setting.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm the analytical one. So I'm the scientist, analytical one. So when we would go into an IEP meeting,
it's about facts, right?
It's about facts, right? It's about, the individual educational plan, the IEP meeting. Are they executing it? Is the documentation happening? Are they doing, their job appropriately? And we did go through a period where we went through 3 separate meetings, a total of 6 hours of IEP meeting, and helping to understand your safeguards and understanding, which they give you what your educational safeguards are for the meeting, but then understanding the special education law, I think was very helpful in how we advocated for Jackson, and it was done appropriately. And so I think you as a special needs parent never stop learning. You end up being a jack of all trades, and you have to. You find community within, and surround yourself with people that are going to help you to be successful, because nobody gives you the answers. Getting services through the county, through the regional centers, nobody tells you. There's no playbook. You talk to people. You have to figure it out through community. And so
it's truly all about networking for special needs parents, whether it be moms and dads. I can tell you the vast majority of our services I've learned through other parents. And they're sitting in those waiting rooms. I always thought, okay, this would be an amazing money-making situation for therapists. You've got your OT, SLP, PT for the kids. Okay, what's happening to these parents?
Yes.
They're here in the waiting room. Much of them are single parents because dad or mom were deployed. Okay, what are we doing? We're talking amongst ourselves. Yeah, we're learning ups and downs or whatever, but there comes a point where at that time, I always thought this would be ideal for the moms to check out and go have their talk therapy, right?
Yeah.
Instead of complaining to each other, because that becomes very heavy. But back to learning our, how to navigate and advocate. It is going to that person, knowing, okay, she just dealt with this. What more can we do? What more can we gather? And it's tenacious and it's exhausting.
Yeah.
Moving and collecting material and documenting and writing emails, and you can't skip a beat. And constant follow up. And this is where I had, Aaron, where we were able to balance off each other and say, okay, this is what needs to get done. But it was exhausting, but we had to do it. We had to do it for Jackson to be in the best place.
Yeah. What we did learn was, once we got the diagnosis for the SynGAP1 gene mutation, and that explained everything. So that actually helped us, gave us a sense of relief, like Monica said, but it helped us to enter into a community. Like Monica said, we were like the 76th patient diagnosed. But what it did was, I immediately Googled it. I talked to my friends who were geneticists, and we got tested. So we knew this was a de novo new random mutation. So immediately Googled, and then immediately started getting connected with other people and other families, and Monica started entering into that. And so we started, expanding our community within the rare disease space within SynGAP in 2006 and 2016. And then we eventually have been very active in advocating for special needs community ever since he was diagnosed. And then in 2018, we joined forces with the SynGAP Research Fund, which a family who was diagnosed wanted to start an organization. So we have been very active with that organization. And SynGAP Research Fund has been very much about educating, creating content to be able to help families navigate through what we're talking about today. Because we're all across the country. We've got a little over 1,200 patients worldwide. And we're connected with patients across the world. I mean, we talk to people in India, Australia, in Europe all of the time. And we're all dealing with the challenges of life in very different cultures, right? And so, from, retiring from a culture, then we've entered into this special needs culture and community where we're helping one another, but we're also collaborating and working with other rare diseases that deal with very, very similar challenges daily.
Well, and there's lots of research that shows that marriages or parents that have a child with autism or that is on the spectrum, just even that one diagnosis, is more likely to get divorced because of the stressors associated with it. And so share with everyone how you guys have stayed connected, how you've handled the stress as a couple, because there's a couple listening right now that isn't maybe necessarily dealing with the level of struggle that you guys have dealt with, but they're struggling in their marriage because of the stress of it. So could you vision cast for them? Like, you've talked about getting therapy. You've talked about being collaborative in your perspectives of how to approach a situation. Like, how do we lean on each other, balance each other out? But how has that been for you guys as a couple to be able to still be together today? And now Jackson is approaching adulthood, and that comes with a whole bunch of other decisions and things that probably to grieve through too. But share a little bit about your marriage and how you've been able to stay strong and stay connected. Or not. Like, it's okay if there have been rough points too, right?
Absolutely. I have to say that it started early on in our relationship when we left the country as newlyweds, and we had only ourselves to rely on, and to learn, and really no outside individuals that were not butting in, but so it was the foundation of learning. As a young couple and young parents, I want to say, that really solidified our marriage and to depend on each other. We've had to learn how to communicate in different ways, as far as me being very emotional and him becoming more emotional and entering my space, and letting that guard down, and also for myself, letting my guard down, not just being used to carrying everything. Okay, I'm tired. I'm emotionally and physically drained, and asking for help, because oftentimes if you don't tell your partner you need help, they think you're doing amazing and you're just so strong, and kudos to you. But it's with SynGAP, especially SynGAP, you're trying to deal with whether it be behaviors, whether it be with side effects from medication or seizures, or being physically drained from your child not being able to walk appropriately. So you're being pulled in so many directions, and until you're able to communicate that, and have a spouse that is willing to listen and step up, you've got to have that, obviously. But it's communicating, and even if we're relearning how to communicate in a more effective way. And I do have to say that therapy has helped us. Living through COVID and being trapped indoors, especially here in California, the whole family realizing that our communication is very ineffective. We had to relearn how to communicate, even with our adult children, and having that openness, though. And, hopefully you have that partner that is receptive, because I know there's so many families that don't have that open communication and can't lean on their spouse. I'm super fortunate that Aaron has always been receptive to me and to my needs, and has always said, what can I do for you? How can I help you in that way? And yes, I definitely share more of, oh, you really want to know how you can? Okay, this is how. And making and knowing that he is going to try to do whatever I ask, or he can't solve everything. And knowing that that's the scientist in him to help. I'm feeling here. To solve my concerns. No, I just need to dump on you. And this is where you need your community, your special needs community. This is where I need my SynGAP moms that I have, that I'm able to say, this is how I feel. And will you share this with me? And knowing that, they're going to listen. They're not going to have the solutions.
Yeah.
Maybe they've never even walked that journey or experienced that yet, but knowing that I can dump on them and that they're going to open their arms and have that virtual hug for me. Yeah. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I think our faith is very important to us.
Absolutely.
I think, that gives us a foundation of forgiveness and a foundation of patience, a foundation of love that supersedes all of the challenges. Doesn't mean it's not difficult, and there's not there's not challenges. There definitely are. But it's allowed me to kind of step back. I leave to go to work, and Monica's at home. Well, it's not like she's just at home, taking naps and watching, TV all day, right? I mean, there's a lot of work that goes into that. You realize into making appointments and following up on referrals and dealing with. And I don't know how single families with special needs. There's a special place for families, where they're single parents and they're dealing with that. We know a number of them because it's not easy. And I think as a husband, I really, when I walk in the door, my goal is, what can I do to relieve Monica of Jackson, because she's been with him all day or she's just gotten back with therapy, so that, she can continue with making dinner or doing whatever. So that's, and that's how I've always kind of approached it, to kind of pick up and give her relief. But I do think the challenges to the divorce, right, is, are like, I think for families where if you don't see what's happening, or you choose not to see what's happening, in the dynamics of that the child changes the dynamics of the family tremendously. So you as the husband and maybe the wife, your needs are not primary.
Mm-hmm.
When you get married, your needs are supporting one another, and you kind of give up some of your needs and desires for your spouses. And with a special needs child, that just intensifies. It happens with children, but it intensifies with a child with special needs. And so those things that you would like, where if you're getting enough sex or not, or you're getting enough of your
just sleep. How about just regular sleep?
Right? or being met, then you have to really understand that you have to change your perspective of where the focus is. But then you have to work together as a couple to find out how you do meet one another's needs, whether it's being intimate and going on a date night, or still having a strong relationship. Because if you don't focus on the relationship, and it's always about the child, then the relationship will have a much higher degree of failure. But you have to work on how am I willing to be vulnerable to let somebody help with the child or your children. And that's important for military families, because we move into communities where we don't know anybody, and you have to find that community. And I think it's difficult. It's difficult to ask, but you have to do that, and then have a priority where you as a couple. The church we went to, we would do several times a year. We would do military parent relief, where the parents could drop off their kids, and the parents could focus on the relationship, or the parent, if their spouse is deployed, could, do something that they needed a break. And that provides an invaluable opportunity of helping military families. So I think communities could do that all across the country. But I think for one another too, to be able to is make sure you also focus on your relationship and ask for help for that to happen.
There's so many questions that I would want for you guys to continue to unpack. I mean, you've just barely scratched the surface on what self-care looks like, right? But what I am hearing you say is, I think, Monica, you said sleep, right? And so being able to identify yourself, your own personal wellness and what you need, and being able to communicate that to your spouse. And like you said, Monica, if your spouse doesn't know, they don't know, right? They can't win if they don't know, is what I always say. And our spouses, I find most of the time, everybody wants to win. Everybody wants to get it right. I really don't think that spouses or couples are out there trying to mess up and trying to get it wrong. I think people want to genuinely win, but we sometimes need to give them the information they need to win. And so I know we barely scratched the surface on the importance of self-care, but I know you guys do a lot of advocacy, and I know that you do a lot of education. Just in closing, is there anything else that you would want to encourage someone listening or make sure that they know about before we wrap up?
In short, plug into the community where you're at. Find a community of support. Find those people where the relationships you can make flourish. Because people will say, what do you need help with? I want to help you. And you may have a difficult situation. Your child's difficult if they're not part of that. Say, if you'd love to help, you can't help at 1 a.m. when things are going to hell in a handbasket and they're not sleeping for hours. But if you want to come over and I can get a nap in, that'd be great. So I think it's trying to build a community. And then I think find, if you have a rare disease or there's something else that you can connect with in a community that's even bigger and outside of the military, find that community within the rare diseases that can help somebody that is dealing with what you're dealing with on a daily basis. That's on a military level, that's on a social level, on a, whether that's church or your synagogue or your institutions. Just find somewhere where you can get the support, and don't be afraid to get therapy and help. Know where again, self-care, as we just touched on, is so very important to allow for your relationship for self and those relationships around you to be healthy.
I have to agree. I want to emphasize, though, the connection within our rare community. Those people that are really living daily with your struggles and can relate. Those people, they become your family. Those are the people you want to do holidays with, go vacation with, because they get it. You don't have to explain what's happening or why it's meds time again, or it's just they understand. And there's a deep connection that you share with those people on their journey.
Guys, I'm so grateful that you are sharing your story and being honest with where you are. Thank you for joining the podcast and making your story known. I try to share regularly on the podcast that there's these different layers of healing. And I really feel like when you get to a place where you're ready to share your story and inspire other people and trying to provide hope to other people, that's like a whole other next level of healing your own story. And we don't all have to be there at that place right now. Sometimes you're just in a survival mode or a survival season. But I think the goal should be, how do I get to a place where at some point I'm able to share my story and encourage someone else who maybe is where I was at some other point. So thank you guys for being willing to do that, for doing the hard work in your relationship so that you could today be here to share that story. Thank you for working hard on your marriage. Thank you for working hard on your family and for investing in all of your kids enough that you would focus on having that intact family together. And I'm just really grateful that I met you, and I'm really grateful that you're able to share your story. So thanks for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Corey.
One of my favorite things is talking to individuals and couples and not only hearing their story, but just really reflecting on everything that they've learned and seeing how much they've grown. And I am always inspired by hearing the growth of a couple that has learned to face difficult things, but also grow together, to see each other more sincerely, to value each other in new ways because of the difficulty that they've gone through. And it doesn't mean that they're completely on the other side, but just hearing how the Hardings really chose to lean into their marriage and take care of their marriage, to go through such an incredible season of parenting their kids kids and trying to figure out, what are the strengths of each other, but then realizing that they needed to value their relationship enough that it was also important to lean into that. There's just so much wisdom. So I hope this was an encouraging interview for you. It was for me. And again, if this is not your circumstances, you are going to run into someone who has a similar story or traces of it, and you'll know when you come across that person. And my hope is that your heart has compassion and it really has stretched by hearing someone else's story. Thank you for listening, and be on the lookout for a bonus interview coming up in the next couple days. Thanks for listening, and thanks for sharing, guys. Thank you for listening to the Life Giver podcast. If you haven't already, please subscribe to this podcast or leave a review so others can find it as well. Were you thinking of someone else who would benefit from hearing today's episode? You can be a life giver to them by simply sharing it with an encouraging note. If you would like to connect with me or find out more about my work, you can visit www.coreyweathers.com.